Okay, welcome everybody. It's 12:15. I'm going to call the meeting for the Northeast ISD School Health Advisory Council to order. Let the record show that a quorum of SHAC members are present. This meeting is in compliance with Section 28.004 of the Texas Education Code and applicable board policy. The council's meeting today will address only the topics on the agenda. No other topics will be discussed during the meeting. SHAC meetings are open to the public. Guests wishing to address the SHAC may do so by emailing the SHAC committee at shac@neisd.net. Any person that causes disruption during the meeting will be asked to leave. Thank you for your cooperation. At this time, please remember that health-related issues can sometimes generate passionate discussions with very different viewpoints. Please remain calm and respectful throughout the process. Please listen carefully with an open mind and identify critical facts and statistics that should be considered in decision-making rather than over-relying on opinions and emotions. Please keep NEISD student health as your top priority to help discussions stay on track. All right, with that, the first item on today's agenda is the approval of the minutes from the March 2024 meeting.
A motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion. Brandon? Motion has been made. We have a second. Is that Diana?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't see you. Thank you, Diana. Is there any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Raise your hand. All right, the motion is approved. Great. The second item is the standing committee reports. At this time, could the chair of the Classroom Health and Sex Ed, Ben Elliott, please step forward and share your updates.
Good afternoon, everybody. The Classroom Health and Sex Ed Committee has continued to work towards finalizing recommended edits for the 8th grade, choosing the best curriculum. We've continued to meet on a weekly basis. There have been some additional meetings called in between. I want to say there's been three additional meetings. Is that correct? Does that sound correct? Three, I believe. I'm sorry, I didn't bring notes, but there were additional meetings called to try to complete the process to be able to have a recommendation made at this meeting. We were unable to reach that because we suspected that we were going to have difficulty reaching the goal of today. We did seek advice from the Board of Trustees as to what the recommended timeline for completion of the edits were. I believe at the last board meeting, the board stated that the goal was to have it done by June 30th, which is the end of this Chase session, so that the existing SHAC could finalize this program. So we are working towards that. Towards completing lesson 8 will be our goal for this Friday, and we hope to be able to bring a recommendation to the full SHAC early June to get it recommended and approved before the end of the June 30th SHAC session.
Thank you, Ben. Next, could I get Lori Fitch with the fitness and physical activity?
She's walking. I know, you'll see I'm walking. I'm not having to talk. Okay, so the physical fitness and activity, we decided to take on seeing how we could increase some activity for the middle schoolers, either before or after school, or during lunch. We invited Jennifer Cooper, the principal of Nimitz, to come and speak about a program that she has at her school during the lunch hour, where when they finish lunch, they can go out on the playground. She has a ball pit and a whole bunch of balls, and they can have a good length of time and just getting to play, getting some time. And so from there, we wanted to see if we could possibly have a survey sent to the other middle school principals to see if one, did they offer anything at their school similar to that, and maybe what would their interest be? And that's sort of where we're sitting right now. We have not sent out a survey. We've kind of tabled that to wait till next year, but that's where we're headed.
Thank you, Lori. Next on the agenda is nutrition. Could I get Lauren Peterson, please, to step up and give us your report?
Okay. So we had the opportunity to have Genevieve Sagalski come and speak with us. And she is basically the PTA chair for the food pantry at Churchill High School. And I think we'd mentioned a little bit about that food pantry. And so we wanted to find out how they've made it such a great success. So it's essentially run by the PTA. And Jen's role on the PTA is just to really take care of that food pantry. And they're doing an amazing job. So on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the end of the school day, they open up the food pantry, which is its own like separate classroom within a part of Churchill that's not really used anymore. And so it houses all the food that they have, and the students are able to come by. They serve on average about 60 kids a day. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The kids come in. They have the one rule that they have is you get one shopping bag. So if you want that, ginormous 5-pound peanut butter jar, that's all that can fit in your bag. That's all you get. They allow 6 kids at a time to come in and do their shopping. And on average, it's about 60 kids Monday, Wednesday, Fridays that they're serving. The way that they get food into the pantry is through donations through the community. They also do use some PTA funds, and they also have a fridge, two refrigerators. One also has a freezer, so they do have some cold items in there that the kids are allowed to shop with. And Jen says that they do grocery shopping weekly, and they spend about $200 on groceries, and what they buy is all the cold stuff. They also have donation bins around the school so that the school can contribute. They also do a lot of posts on social media so that those that are keyed into the Churchill community can go ahead and donate items. They have an Amazon wish list so that you can go shopping for the school on the wish list. Mr. Bloomer, the principal there, he's an amazing principal. And one of the things that's so amazing about him is knowing that Churchill High School has such a tradition of history, or I guess like it's been open for a long time. So they have a lot of alumni groups that want to come back and tour the school, and he will allow them to tour the school if they make a financial donation to the food pantry. So let's see. They also are working to collaborate with the special education department so that they can have some of those kids that come in and learn stocking skills and are able to help the kids with the shopping. So that's a nice collaboration there. They have a snack table that's out that has fruit, granola bars, the sweet and salty bars, and it's open to anyone. And this is what is amazing about the Churchill Food Pantry. It's open to anybody. So if you are a hungry athlete and you just need to come and grab a bar, you can go and grab a bar. There's no work that's required to be done by anybody on staff to qualify these kids to be able to do the shopping. And it's understood that these kids are potentially taking food home to help feed their siblings or their family, and that's fine. And so because there's no qualifying factors for these kids, it's almost like there's no stigma. And so it's a real comfortable, safe space for these kids that are hungry and are truly benefiting from it. There's also a hygiene section with toilet paper, dental supplies, soap, etc. She said that some of the limitations that they face are, of course, having volunteers that are there. Jen's very dedicated to it. So she's there every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and if she can't be there, she's got somebody filling in for her. Of course, budget can be an issue. So when we think about, taking learnings and trying to apply them to other schools. Do we have as great a volunteer network as we do at Churchill? Is there enough of a budget there to helps support this? But in a way, anything is better than nothing. So when we asked Jen, okay, so if we could go to the school board and say these are some things that we would like from the district to help support food pantries across the district. Perhaps one of the things is an infrastructure to help build out the facilities so that if there's, a northeast basement somewhere that has desks or tables or shelving units, especially a lot of shelving units to store the food, that could be potentially something to consider. It's nice to have a staff member that's there on campus that can come down and help to kind of regulate the line, make sure that the kids are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And of course, as always, you need to have a really motivated either staff member or a principal that is motivated to do this and to support it. So that was one thing that we did. We also were able, and thank you, Jessica Esslinger, for getting this set up for us, identifying this program and then setting up the meeting. But we were able to meet with Stacy Sanchez, who works with No Kid Hungry here in the state of Texas. No Kid Hungry is a national nonprofit. It's run by Share Our Strength, and their primary focus is ending childhood hunger. And so we have been able to work as a district with No Kid Hungry before. What they really focus on are making sure that they're making grants available to schools. They help with any kind of technical assistance to run food intervention programs, and then also advocacy. So it's really interesting to note also, Sharon Glosson was there with us, and she's always a wealth of information. But 47 out of our 68 campuses are CEP campuses. And what that means is that all the students there do benefit from free breakfast and from lunch, and that's all determined by government standards, which campuses will be those CEP campuses. And the grant that we received from No Kid Hungry was during COVID, and this was to buy equipment to help with curbside feeding, when the kids were going and getting in the line at the front of the school to get their meals. But they do other programs focusing on breakfast after the bell to help with tardy kids. With Sharon, we were talking about how a program like this would really only work with these CEP campuses where you don't have to worry about paying for the breakfast, but because then now you're doing a point of sale at like a little kiosk or a little stand for kids. So the other idea that they work on is a grab and go. So you have like almost like a little stand set up, and kids can grab a breakfast as they're going to class. However, some of the drawbacks here are it could potentially encourage tardiness because you can get to school late and grab a breakfast, and then there's the disruption in the class if the kids are taking a breakfast into the class and the mess that you want to think about the staff having to deal with. It is available to some of our campuses already. The other thing that they suggested is second chance breakfast, and some of our athletic groups are already doing this, so that after everybody comes through and gets their breakfast for that first period class where you have those athletes that are coming in late or they've been out working out, they can come in. It does require having a coach or a dedicated staff member that's there to kind of monitor the situation. So one of the issues with the grab and go pilot is that those menus tend to be carb heavy, so we're not necessarily giving kids a lot of protein in the morning, which is something that we really do try to do. The locations at this pilot program that was done at the elementary level, the locations for the kids to eat was scattered, so that complicated things because you had food messes and kids kind of all over. There ended up being a long line at the cart, which was not ideal. And they have to serve the same options at the cart as they do the cafeteria, so that adds just another layer of difficulty. So, at this point, we've been talking as a committee what can we put forward, and potentially it might be working with those second chance schools that are already offering second chance breakfasts, taking those learnings and seeing if we could apply them to other campuses and make sure all of our campuses are taking advantage of that so that all of our kids at least have the opportunity to start out with a meal, especially the ones that are getting there early for extracurriculars. So that's where our update for now. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lauren. All right, next up is the Safe and Healthy Schools, Mr. Brandon Broom.
All right, well, mine will be short and sweet. We don't really have a lot right now that we've been tasked with, so we've been brainstorming some ideas to discuss going forward. And a couple of the hot button items that we've kind of talked about that are important. Is it coming through? Okay, and things that have been coming around that have been voiced as problems are vaping, substance abuse, but vaping in particular. What else can we do to get awareness out there in a more effective way for the kids to try to cut back on that and the problems associated with it? And another thing that was brought up that I think we've had some good feedback with so far is looking at cell phone policies. Campus, or district-wide potentially that would either restrict or prohibit use of cell phones during the day. There's some other examples of districts around the state that have done this and had very good success with it. So hopefully buying into some of those things, we've got some good things in the pipeline. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Next on the agenda is the Health Ad Hoc Committee recommendation and possible action. Committee co-chairs Brandon Broom and Lori Fitch. No race to the podium.
Hey, we have no equipment today, no crutches, no nothing. Okay, well, kind of getting started on this. Oh, I can click through with this, can I? All right, so just to give a little bit of background, I'm going to kind of skip over this. Y'all have gotten this through the email, so our final recommendation, we'll kind of discuss this farther at the end. I'm going to try to address some of the comments that were sent in to us as we go through this, okay? And then we've got the list of everyone's comments to make sure we didn't leave anything out at the end out of fairness. But there were a few comments that kind of said, hey, we felt this was rushed, we're unprepared. This came out of a board discussion back towards the end of February. And so the ad hoc committee was tasked with looking at these three options and making a recommendation to the board. We've actually been meeting for an hour and a half or more every week for 8-9 weeks now, in addition to some other after hours time. So please, please, please don't think this was rushed by any means. We try to do all our due diligence and do everything possible to get as much information to provide everyone to make a good, solid recommendation to the board. So just be aware of that. But these were the three options that we were tasked with. Keep health optional, make it optional, keep it mandatory with the waiver, or just leave it mandatory as is with no changes. Little background on the TEKS, because this has been a source of confusion to a lot of people. If you just look at the essential knowledge and skills units that are required for every student in the district in high school, whether you take health or not, the two that are required are these two that are listed first: CPR and AED instruction, and the fentanyl abuse and drug poisoning awareness. So those two are mandatory for every child in the district, no matter what. The separate TEKS that would pertain to the health class would only apply to the students should they take the class. So state law is that it has to be, it's an optional thing. It does not have to be mandatory. But if they do take it, whatever decision is made, then the TEKS would apply. There were some questions. What are those TEKS? I didn't list it all on here, but the Health One TEKS include healthy self, communication skills, healthy eating and physical health changes, substance abuse, sex ed, parenting and paternity awareness, health and community safety, in addition to some other ones. So these are important topics, and I don't think anyone, from the board down to us, I don't think anyone has suggested removing them at all. And to leave that, again, I don't think there's ever been any doubt that these aren't important topics. So the parent and family survey that went out, there were some comments made about this, why certain grades, what were the response rates, why this, that, and the other. Please be aware, this came from the Board of Trustees. So they chose who to send this to. They spent a lot of time deliberating this and making their decisions, and there was good reasoning behind all of them. They also compiled the data and sent it to us in the way that they felt was fit. We didn't choose that, okay? And so we can answer to some of these as much as we can, but just know that this wasn't our doing. But it's still helpful nonetheless. So they had 2,647 respondents. So from a board's perspective, and this is coming from Dr. Micah, that's actually a very high response rate. So if you look at all the students in the district, well, there's close to 50,000. Now, this was sent to sixth grade up, and the reasoning for that was these are kids that are directly involved in the now or in the near future with the decision to implement health. By excluding the elementary kids, these are people that may not have any knowledge of this yet, so their responses may not be as valid. So that was the thought process behind this. But overall, it says actually a very high response rate. Many of the surveys that get sent out from the district-wide, from my understanding, talking with Dr. Micah, are in the hundreds. So 2,600 is actually a very good response rate. So what do we find? The big question here was, would you support this class being an optional elective? And so whether we stratified it amongst high school or middle school only, or as an aggregate, it really did not change. So 78.9, say 80% versus 20% said yes, they would like to see this optional, versus the other 20% that said no. There were some comments that they felt the question may have been misleading. Some people may not have understood that. If the question is misleading, a lot of times you will see a 50-50 response rate, right? Or you'll see a big discrepancy in the comments. The comments were emailed out to everybody as well. Take heart. I mean, we looked at that. We broke them down statistically. We looked at which categories sent more comments. Ironically, a lot of the group that answered this question yes, meaning that they would be in favor of health becoming optional, put in a comment of support for the class itself. And I think the take home from that at the end of the day is there are a subset of people that feel like, hey, they don't want this necessarily to be mandatory, but they also see the value in this class. And so there were a couple comments about discrepancies there. And you can look at that a lot of different ways, but I hope that makes most sense. That's kind of our take home when we kind of analyze it every different way. The other question we thought was important was, was or will your student be able to take health in high school? There's a couple other explanations that went along with the question on the actual survey, but 60% of the students of the responses said their students will be able to take health without foregoing an elective or taking summer school. Okay, and so I think that's important because that's one of the big complaints that we get a lot is that, hey, it's very difficult to fit this in. Also, 40% of the families then, on the flip side of that, say they will have difficulty fitting this in. So take that, as is. If it's mandatory, you're going to have to fit it in no matter what. So, but the thing that we're trying to figure out from all this is it a horrible inconvenience or not? The staff survey, we had 46 respondents. 65% of these, I don't have a pointer here or anything, 65% of these were made up of school counselors, nurses, and teachers. So just kind of keep that in mind. We would have liked to see a little bit more response from the principals and administrators on the other side on their end, because resource allocation is more in their category. We were on a little bit of a time crunch here. And so by the time this went out, I think that, it is what it is. Overall, we got a good response rate. And that was another question that we had sent to us was, hey, some of the people that know staff, or it may have come from a staff member, we don't know, but how much time do we have and why? Why can we have more time? That was really beyond our control. Okay, we tried to send some questions to the board that we thought would be relevant and helpful, and we had a limited time to catch this. But we had a 27% response rate, which is, in the survey world, that's actually pretty good. So the main one here is rank these in order of preference. So the top preference would be keep health mandatory. I think the next one was mandatory with waivers, and then the bottom one is make health optional. The way this is ranked, they would rank them 1, 2, and 3, with 1 being their top preference. So the lower number is the preferred number on the survey. So the keep health mandatory is 1.6, and the other two are 2.2. Okay, so this would lead a trend towards the staff surveyed leaning towards keeping health mandatory. So our recommendation, a little bit too, we took a slide out. We discussed trying to not keep this so wordy. We interviewed several members from the staff, different categories, different involvement with health and curriculum and things along the way. y'all have been emailed that list. We can go through everything in more detail with people if you have questions, and there's going to be plenty of time for that here. But I know that their feedback to us, we got feedback. Mr. Jarrett went to the TEA and got specific, long-winded or long-written email with some facts to back up about the TEACs. Not long-winded, but it's but very helpful information, because that actually supports what Jennifer had sent us, what the district has sent us, what other people have given us, so that we can come up with an informed decision. When we started, our committee was divided pretty well across all three options. We had different people in every camp, and as we start deliberating this, we start kind of coming together. And what we came with, our main recommendation was to keep health mandatory, but implement a process where the students could have waivers if they demonstrate the need for this. And there is clearly a need for this class, and I don't think anybody could argue that. The stuff that's taught in the class is valuable and important. The question then becomes, how do you address, if 80% of the parents out there that responded to this survey really wanted some sort of option, how do you address that? And how do you address the other side that see the value in this, that want it important? And many of those that say that they want it optional may still take the class, right? So what can you do to really kind of make sure that we're not neglecting anyone, A, that wants to take it, or B, that maybe need to take it and may not be informed enough to even know that yet. So kids in our district come from all different sorts of walks of life and have all different sorts of support at home and different levels of knowledge and ways that can kind of help them through this phase of life. And so for those that may not get enough of it, this could actually be very, very important to them, and we don't want them to be neglected. So a very good compromise, what we felt was very good middle ground that would encompass everybody, was keep it mandatory, but offer waivers. And the waiver process is a whole nother lengthy discussion, and that's really to a large extent beyond our purview, because that's going to fall back on the board of trustees in the district on what criteria is going to be there, how do you even implement, how do you go about the waiver process, how are you going to pull all that off and get it going. So, but in general, our thought was this is going to be the best way to make all sides happy and capture everybody. As we discussed it, there's still a little disagreement of, hey, we still don't know how this is going to happen, or this, and so we all felt different way. We kind of went back and forth with our main recommendation being really long, and then we shortened it, and then we pulled. So we kind of said, you know what, let's pull these 3 bullet points at the bottom aside and say, hey, we kind of have some other suggestions that we'd like to throw in there as well, and bring to the full SHAC for discussion. So we can't really decide everything that's going to be required with this, but one thing that would be nice that would show that there's been a thought out process from the parents would be to have a meeting between the student, the guardian, and the counselor that would demonstrate the need for the waiver. And the next bullet point that you'll see there is that hopefully when the board goes to consider what is going to go into the waiver process, that will in turn come back to SHAC to add some input to the consideration. And then the final thing was that the waiver process be not just catch all right away, that it be implemented staggered based on grade out of fairness. And that's our final recommendation. Did I leave things out? And there's plenty of time for discussion. And so, and I also want, this is kind of it's easy to say things and they can be construed one way. And so I want anyone to correct me if I'm speaking out of line here, but I'm trying to just give the basic rundown of what we've done over the last several weeks. The questions, do you?
Yeah, Lori, I can bring them up. We'll put the questions that the full SHAC sent in, and so try to make sure that
if it'll blow up, great, and I've got them printed here too to kind of go through. The top one here is what would the workload be on the counselors, and was this discussed with Ms. Garcia? So yes, it was, and the answer is we don't know yet because it's new. And so a lot of this is gonna depend on.
Just to clarify, it was discussing committee, not with Ms. Garcia.
Correct. Yeah, and it was just discussed amongst us. And so this is for y'all's background, like talking to Ms. Garcia. So there are a handful of these topics that overlap with the TEKS and health, actually, that the kids get at least once a year already from the guidance counselors. So redundancy is actually a good thing here, and that was supported by everybody here. But to know exactly what their workload would be, and exactly what would be tasked with them from this, if there's a change made, or if kids didn't, opted not to take health or were wavered out of it, we don't know yet. Because that'll be a decision that has to be made by the board and the district on how we're going to implement the mandatory TEKS for those who aren't taking the class. What percentage of the families responded in total by grade? We don't have the overall percentage. So this is, and the follow up of that next question was, I heard from employees they received a message and by the time that they had time to complete the survey, it was less than 72 hours and the survey was closed. The staff survey that went out was not up for very long. And at the time it went out, we were hoping to get the results very quickly. Some of that's a little bit beyond our control. We got 27% response rate. We talked about this, and it's kind of, would it have been beneficial to send it back out tomorrow? We love it if we had, 1,000 responses, but at the end of the day, we kind of all doubted that if we got 100 more responses, if we let it go for a few more days, that the statistical numbers would really change all that much, if that makes sense. Moving down, parents overwhelmingly want an optional health elective. Preference from staff was a 0.6% difference. There was comment about the $40 million deficit or so from the district. Staffing of health as an elective would be less than if it's mandatory. The requirements can be taught in PE or other avenues. This could be a big cost savings. Many parents responded they're unable to meet the requirements of the schedule, or that they can meet the schedule, but this is basically because it's mandatory. That's a point that's well taken, and that was actually discussed quite a bit amongst our committee. Every little line item here. The budget per se is not for us to decide. That's going to be the board and the district's responsibility to work in the budget. If it were, if somehow doing this were cost savings to them, that's going to be their call. Our job is really to try to represent input from the parents. Yes, based on the survey, it certainly appears that the majority of the parents would prefer to have some sort of option on the class, and hence even though we started kind of divided on this, hence the recommendation that we offer the waiver process. Point also taken, I hope I discussed that already on that a lot of parents said, well, yes, we can take it right now, but it's mandatory, they have to. And that's a valid point, and it's well taken. But no doubt there are a subset of parents. My own sons included, just for transparency. But we're going to have to take more than one class in summer school to fit it all in addition to athletics and other things. So that's just part of it. If it's mandatory, then we'll make it work. That's what's going to happen. So. But that's part of this whole process. So is it possible to see the questions for the meeting? Here you go. And then I have several concerns and questions about the data and the recommendation. Question 3 was skewed and misleading. Several parents I spoke to didn't understand the question. SHAC cannot place burden on the board. We shouldn't place the burden on the board to come up with a waiver process, nor do I believe that it's within the scope of the SHAC to ask the board to then present their work back to the SHAC for approval and vote. As the recommendation stands, with its staggered implementation of the waivers, it seems that more families with elementary students would be affected than high school families. If they were not allowed to give input, the low number of responses does not warrant any change to the current health requirement. The number of responses does not seem significant. What was the number of surveys sent out? So we don't have the data to show the total number of surveys sent out and the total response rate. It was never given to us in the raw data. What we do know from feedback from the board is that's an extremely high number. 2,647 kids is an extremely high number compared to other surveys that they've seen in the past. 80% of that number said one way. It wasn't 52, 48, it was 80, 20. And so that's a pretty telling sign. The rest of this is all for discussion today when we discuss this. So valid point. It didn't go out to the elementary school families. If we implemented this in a staggered fashion, that's the ones it's going to affect. And so depending on how we recommend that, I mean, that's how it's going to be. Now, as far as recommending this to the board, the board gave us 3 options, and keeping it mandatory with the waiver is one of the options. So, of course, it's a burden on someone to have to figure out how they're going to do this, and that's unfortunate, right? But if we make it totally optional, then we haven't listened or paid enough attention to the ones with the voice that want it mandatory. If we don't make any change at all, then we haven't listened to a lot of the people that have voiced concern and desire for this to have some sort of option. And so that's a nice middle ground here where we can still hit both sides, if that makes sense. And that's all the questions. There's got to be more.
So I guess we can open the floor to current questions.
There's a second one here too, Sean, if that helps. Thank you, Sean. I have a question, and maybe I just am not quite understanding, but if the question was, should we keep it mandatory or not? I don't see the benefit of saying it's mandatory and you can go through a waiver process, which in my experience, trying to get things waivered for my kids in school takes a while. Plus, it's kind of a pain in the rear for the person that's doing the paperwork. And they've tried to talk kids out of it because it's just paperwork that they don't want to have to deal with. So I don't see why it has to stay mandatory. I mean, because either side's going to be happy if it's optional. If you want your kids to take it, take it. If you don't, don't. And it would save a lot of time and effort, probably money, to not have to put through a waiver process. Just seems complicated to me.
A concern that was brought up regarding that, right, is there are a lot of people coming in that have no idea what's in this class, that have no idea how it could help them. And there are a lot of kids that are coming in, say they move in from somewhere else, say they are a migrant child and haven't had any help before. I mean, there's a lot of, or they come from here and they have, they have parents that are working that just don't have time to sit down and do this. I mean, but for those kids who may not know, that just may gloss this over and skip it, that we missed the chance to potentially have a positive impact in their life through the class. I mean, they get it other ways also, for sure. But this is a way to make sure we don't miss those, is by leaving the requirement there. But if it's overly burdensome on them and they don't need it, it gives the student and the parents a chance to come in and say, hey, I can show you right now why my kid doesn't need this, and they can still choose a better option for themselves, if that makes sense. And it's that question is going to boil a lot down to personal feeling, and it's not a right or wrong answer. Honestly, I don't think, because I started this out saying I think it should be optional, and I listened to both sides of this, and there's certain things I can make a good argument for a lot of things, but there's certain things that you can't, though, and that's where we kind of, the meeting in the middle part was for both sides, was good here.
If I can add to that real quick, 2 things to answer back to your question. The burdensomeness of the waiver, that's going to fall on the board and the district to make that simpler or complicated. But something you said was key to our discussion on the ad hoc committee You just said the counselors or the waiver process are talking the kids out of it because they don't want to use the waiver, they don't want to do the paperwork. That was one of the reasons we had that long list Brandon talked about of all the extra stuff we thought we wanted to add, and it kept getting longer and shorter. That's why we left the parent, guardian, student, and counselor, because now you've got a parent, guardian that wants to advocate and use their voice. They have a way to get in there and use the voice, and they're there for their kid. And maybe the counselor is going to be good enough at talking the parent out of it, but the parent is there as well. So it's not a kid being talked into taking something. It's the parent, and that's their voice and their opportunity to advocate for themselves, outside of how complicated the process may or may end up being. Does that make sense?
Not really, because I've been on the parent side of it, and I've still had counselors coming at me with why I shouldn't talk my child out of it, and I've had to stand firm and say, this is not what we have decided as a family to do. So in my opinion, I just see it as if it's optional, then it's optional. It doesn't mean that you have to or don't have to take it. And maybe a better way of looking at it would be, like you mentioned, families coming into the district, maybe as part of the registration process in going into high school to say, I understand that this, so that it's more of an informed thing up front. And maybe that would be the way to take care of it with all of those forms that we have to sign to say, we want to participate or we don't. Sign here. Why does there have to be a meeting where I, as a parent, have to take time off work and coordinate with a counselor? And it just seems complicated for parents. That's all. And I won't say anything.
You want to judge?
I think you were next.
Yeah, I had my hand up. So my question, my initial question that I raised my hand to ask, but I would like, before I ask it, I would like to state that I also would prefer it to just be an optional class, right? But I do understand, to your point, Brandon, like, I understand that the default being mandatory makes it so that the children whose parents aren't necessarily as involved, their default is they have to take the class, right? Because if a kid gets to pick their schedule and it's completely optional, most of the time the child is not going to pick, I want to take health. So I understand the value of the default being you have to take health with a parental waiver. My question, I don't like conditions on the waiver. I think the waiver should be a parent says, I want to opt out, and that should be the end of it. How it's done, obviously, right, is not up to us. It would be up to the board. My question is the recommendation tied to the conditions? Because obviously the conditions aren't for us to decide, but if the waiver was conditional, I would be against that process, more for an optional only. And I look at it kind of like the vaccination requirement, right? I can, and I do, request an affidavit from the state, get it notarized, send it in, boom, there's my waiver. That's it. It's not complicated. I don't have to sit and meet and explain myself. I just hand them a piece of paper that says this is why I'm exempt from this, and that's the end of it. So with all of that said, I respect y'all's decision. I think it was very well thought out. Obviously, the parental feedback was rather an overwhelming majority, and I think it is appropriate to acknowledge, because the SHAC's purpose, our existence is, after all, to reflect community values. And if we're seeing all of those community values in a survey and we're not acknowledging them, then we're not doing what we were signed up to do. That being said, like I said, the default being mandatory, I get why, right? For the students whose parents aren't paying attention, or, not necessarily as engaged, those children may not be getting the type of health teaching from their home unit, right? And they need it, and there is good content in it, right? We've seen that. So with all of that said, back to my question, is the recommendation for mandatory with waiver tied to conditions?
You want to answer that? I don't want to butt heads.
You answer.
There's a, well, and reword it if I'm not saying it right. So as we discuss that, we went round and round. So it started off just one long paragraph, right, with everything tied together. Kind of like, when we did the bylaws recently, there were a few things that we were just really divided 50% on. And we said, oh, hey, here's our recommendation for the bylaws. But over here in red is two things we would like the board to consider. And before this goes to a vote today, this is something that should be clarified. Do we want to include it all together, or do we want to say we're only voting on the main recommendation, mandatory with waivers, and then these are our suggestions to go along with it, just for the board, for further consideration for the board, not with a requirement together. Does that sound?
I can't tell. Is this on? So your question is spot on. We had that round and round and round. And I think at the end of the day, what we were trying to convey was more of a consideration. Please take these things into consideration versus a hard and fast, because we aren't in charge of the waiver process. We were given guidance that we were allowed to do some brainstorming of suggesting. We were given that guidance that we were allowed, but we were also, our theme in our committee discussion was to stay out of the weeds. Stay out of the weeds. It came up almost every meeting. And I think that in place of that was, okay, this is our main recommendation, and we would like some considerations. And that's why the number 2 one, oops, not up, it has the word request. And we actually went back and forth and back and forth. Should we say request in front of all of them or not? And we didn't want our considerations to come across as a mandate, because it's not. They may come up with an idea of something else, but at least they understood where the intention started from. And it may look totally different in the end. But I think we all just talked through our own, concerns, and just was hopeful that that could be elevated through a request.
I really don't like talking on a microphone. Okay, my question is, based on Texas guidelines, the kids have to have one health requirement, correct? Most all of our children take that in middle schools.
Correct.
If you're talking about like immigrants, kids coming in from other districts, and they don't have it, then that health class would be mandatory because they would have to have it in order to graduate.
Correct.
So we're duplicating a process by having health mandatory in any ISD that the majority of districts across the state of Texas do not have. So I think that is just something in consideration, that it goes back to it being optional. I think if the kids want to take the health class, and if they didn't have it in middle school, then they would have to take it in order to graduate if they've come in from somewhere else. But for your children that are here and have gone through any ISD and take it in middle school, they want to take it, it should be optional. But I agree with the whole process of the waiver. If it's conditional and you're having to sit down with a counselor and discuss your personal opinion or preference, it should be a parental and child choice. That I took my health in middle school that was state required for my graduation. High school, it should be optional.
We also, is this on? Okay. We were concerned that that intention of that counselor survey, this is not to prove you're the parent that can do it. This was to elevate the conversation of awareness of the class, period. Do you know what's in the class? Great. And you still are cool with waiving it? Perfect. This was never supposed to be a personal test of a parenting skill. And if that came across that way, I deeply apologize, because that's not. Okay, maybe I misunderstood your, okay, maybe I misunderstood your comment.
It just
All
goes
right.
back to the understanding of the state requires one health class. Most all of our children take that health class in middle school for a graduation requirement. The mandatoriness of having to take a health class in high school is a burden, an overabundance that should not be here. My children have all graduated. They all had to take health. I also was a huge, when NEIC passed, to have healthy lifestyles. There was a requirement for a health class along with a few things that athletes, band, dancers, everybody had to take. Huge nightmare. Took years for us to get overturned. So just having already had kids go through the process, I don't think it's fair that kids should have to take something in summer school. You know, they're in school, they're months of the year. So it's just as a parent that's already gone through this and done that, that's just my voice of reason, I guess.
Mr. Broom, may I clarify something on that? Just on that middle school credit. So I think there's maybe a little bit, and I saw this on responses because I read all the comments throughout all of them. So the state of Texas we have health TEKS in middle school for 6th grade. So we require health in 6th grade in Northeast. And there are TEKS that are banded together for 7th and 8th grade. To be quite honest, currently we don't require a 7th and 8th grade middle school health class. So the students who take 8th grade health for high school credit, those kids would not take it again in high school. That is the same course. So this was not, and I saw that in there. There were a lot of people who said, well, my child took it in 8th grade. If you took health in 8th grade, you are done with your high school credits. That's the only 8th grade course we offer.
And that's a new change that's happened since my children graduated, because that was not the case when my kids graduated. You took your 8th grade health credit, and you also had to take health in high school, which was an NEISD requirement for health to be in high school. So if that has changed, then
I can't speak to that, but as it sits right now, the only 8th grade health course that is offered is 8th grade for high school credit. And so they're already checking that off, and I could definitely tell in looking at some of the feedback, parents kind of like you said, well, my child already took it in 8th grade, why should they have to take it again in high school? And they wouldn't, because the only one we offer in 8th grade is the 8th grade for high school credit.
There's been a lot of
And I want to throw up one more point of clarification. I want to throw up one more point of clarification from inside the ad hoc. There's 3 different speakers and 3 different times we've been worried about the waiver process. We don't know what the waiver process is. That's going to be beholden to the board and the district to determine what that is. It could be as simple as you show up, you have your meeting to get your kid enrolled in school, and you sign the thing and off and you're done. Or it could be as complicated as they choose to make it, which is why we put point request number 2 up there, to have that come back to us, to keep it from being overly burdensome, because ultimately it's a parent choice, and we want that to be a parent choice. The counselor's not the gatekeeper, it's just a facilitator at this point, is our idea and intent. But we don't have control over that, what happens with the waiver process. That's going to be the board and the district. So that's just an unknown that we had to deal with making this recommendation.
Okay. Sorry for my voice, because I'm getting over a thing. It's just lingering, not contagious. You're all fine. I did sanitize my hands. So the district has a scorecard, right? 4 S's: stakeholders, students, staff, and stewardship, right? The students and the stakeholders are our parents and our community, and they are the majority that we really need to be looking at when we are considering this. If 80% of the parents take the comments out, because the ones that said they wanted it mandatory, there were comments saying that they actually wanted it optional, and it was vice versa. So just look at the statistics. 80%. Let's not discount that. When we look at the staff, the preference 1, 2, 3, very negligible. You had 15, 16 people that preferred mandatory. You had 22 on each one of optional or mandatory with waiver. That is a very negligible amount when you're looking at statistics. I love math, I love stats, so that was like a thing that went off for me. If we look at the students, the burden on 40% of our students that are taking these magnet programs, right? We're trying to bring children into this district through these magnet programs. We're trying to appeal to a broader area of kids and getting them in the district, because let's face it, this district is losing children by the year, and not by a couple hundred, by thousands. And we are already predicting, as Micah said in the, not the last one, but the one before board meeting, that we're going to lose about, he didn't say the amount, but it was going to be significant. And the numbers have come out, and it's like 3,500 we're going to lose for next year. I already know several people that have come up to me in my own neighborhood that said, we're pulling our kids, we're going to charter school, we're tired of the mess, we're tired of the mandates, we're tired of this, we're tired of that. I've pulled my kids for the sheer mess that I don't want to have the health mandate. It interferes with my one child's goals in life. The other one is just not where she wants to be. They're getting it 4th grade and 5th grade maturation. They're getting 6th grade health. We bring in through other avenues, other areas of this health that we're consistently repeating. I think optional is the best option. I agree with mandatory with a waiver. I do think the waiver process should be very succinct. I agree over here, where it should just be very quick. It's a piece of paper, like a vaccination. That's where I'm sitting. And when we look at stewardship, the resource allocation that our administrators at our schools have to go through for this, if you are making health an elective, you do not have to staff as much. And a lot of this can be brought in through the counselors that they're already doing, and they're already getting biology. Everyone's got to take biology. They're getting a lot of this through biology. They're getting a lot of it through chemistry. They're getting a lot of it through their English class. We constantly are talking about suicide prevention throughout the years. All the groups do them, all the clubs do them. I don't think our children are missing anything when it comes to what is presented in the health class if we make it optional. That is where I lie. Sorry, that was very windy.
Bonnie, go ahead. You've had your hand up for a little bit.
I have several questions just about the data collection process. My first question is, there's a lot of assumptions in this room about what students would choose if they had the choice. Is anybody going to ask them?
Yeah, that's a tough call. Like, what grade do you ask? Who do you ask? Students, as much leeway as we want to give them to make these kind of decisions that might affect policy, they're young, developing brains, and
I'm
they
a
haven't
therapist.
been through.
I know about brains. You're saying all of these things about, oh, I don't think the students would choose it if they had the choice. It gets in the way, blah, blah, blah. But no one has asked them. Like, I'm not saying they make the decision, but they should have an input. That's my question there. My second question is, how was the staff notified about the survey? I found it shocking that so few of them answered it.
I agree with you. It went out on an email.
And they get how many emails a day?
I can't say for that. The district took care of that for us. So, and that really was a little bit. They asked us to provide questions to them for a staff survey, and we provided the questions. As soon as we got the data, we came out and we had a couple weeks left. And so, I mean, a lot of moving parts. And
Sure.
but and your point's well taken about the students, and that was discussed too. And if we were gonna make suggestions about the waivers, what do we put? And that's kind of why that first one said guardian and parent or guardian and student, because we wanted that, and that part of it is important.
Okay. My other question is just generally, this does feel very rushed, and I hear you saying it was a board mandate. The board members are reasonable people. I find it hard to believe you couldn't say, can we have a couple more weeks so the SHAC can review so we can get more staff input? I don't understand, not asking for that.
I think, honestly, the number of hours that we spent on this, we're ready. I mean, there's not much more, that we needed for this. And I don't know. I mean, we could find more things to go chasing down over and over and over again. But the main point that we were asked is not let's don't figure out the whole process. Who's going to teach the TEKS if it's optional? Or, what are the waivers going to be? How are we going to implement the waivers? It was choose option A, B, or C. And that's to start. So that will go back to the board for further discussion. There's a lot. I mean, there's going to be a lot more to do with this. And so, I mean, when we started, we felt like it was like, are we going to have enough time? Or this is it's coming up, and we met every week, and we all came together and agreed that, hey, we've got what we need.
Just to speak a little bit to you, Bonnie, we wanted to make sure that no staff felt like their voice was not being heard. And we do know that there was a time issue with some of that. And I think to speak back to, we try to do main takeaways and not get into more of the details, which I know people like. So we didn't look at, okay, well, there was only a 5-person difference. We just looked at the main takeaway because we want to respect that there were some things out of our control with that, and that we also spoke to, if we put it back out, would it change the overall main takeaway? Which no, it probably wouldn't. So we respected the main voice that we heard. So that piece was acknowledged and heard. And as we went through each meeting, we found ourselves going into the details and then found ourselves backing out, because I do think it's important that getting into the weeds in these committees is above our pay grade. This is not a end-all be-all. This is an idea that will be developed at a later time.
Just tell me where I'm supposed to go.
Okay, I do have a couple comments and questions. First of all, I have heard you, Brandon, say multiple times, time crunch, limited on time. Those have been words you've said. And in our committee, we have spent an entire year and we are still accused of rushing. So for us especially to feel that what you guys have done isn't rushed is very difficult, I think, for us to comprehend, because the same person telling you a deadline is the same person telling us we're rushing. So, yes. So, thank you. I feel like that's very valuable information for those of you who don't know, because that is what we've experienced. Can the board say that they don't want a waiver process? Is that something? I know for us, the board can reject anything we recommend. Is that okay?
They can come back out and say, we're not making any changes. I mean, all we can do, we're an advisory committee to the board, so we just make recommendations.
Additionally, I think I heard that there were 66,000 emails sent out for this survey. How many? 33 twice? 33 two times.
33,143 is what was said in the April 8th board meeting, and that was sent twice. But the reality is, 33,000.
33,000 responses could be received. But we received 26,000, while 2,600, sorry, 2,600. Take a zero off. So I think the way that I see this is that this was a community value issue. I think that there were people who were well aware of this survey who wanted to give their input. It's sort of like good review, bad review for something. You're going to get the bad reviews all the time, and I feel like that's what this survey was. We want it optional, we want it optional, we want it optional. But the good reviews, like, it's fine, I'm fine with it either way, I'm fine with this mandatory class. They were less motivated, I feel, to submit a survey that maybe they didn't feel qualified to submit. Does that make sense?
I don't know why they wouldn't feel qualified. It's an anonymous survey.
Because they aren't fully aware of what's in the health class.
It explained. As much as you can't do that for 30-something thousand people and make sure that no one's confused about one iota.
Most of the community feedback I received was they were confused. Because it didn't, question number 3 was not, it didn't say change. It didn't say, would you support the change from mandatory to optional? It just says, would you support an optional class?
It is. So the board vetted this out for a long time. They chose the survey, not us, and it went out in a way that they felt was best. I'll tell you, the people that I've talked to that filled it out didn't have any trouble understanding it. We met as a committee and talked about this and didn't feel it was that vague.
I definitely believe that.
I mean, so I don't think it was that. I mean, time crunch thing. I mean, you can't just keep putting it off and asking for more data and more data. It's time to move forward. So
Yeah.
there's enough. This came up to the board in their discussions for a long time. A lot of parents have emailed comments to the board, and it's been at the meetings, and they've been discussing this, and it came up as a board for an item that they want to address. So they came to
Yeah.
us to do it. In the past, it wasn't brought to SHAC, and they want to make sure it's done and done right.
Yeah, so I have an appreciation for different levels of the parental involvement and parental awareness. I've sent my kids to 2 different high schools, different kids, and you see a difference. And so I get that some people are not going to be motivated to fill out this survey. And I get that a lot of us in this room are very motivated to have a voice and to speak up and to advocate. But on behalf of those kids that don't have a guardian or a parent that's advocating, I have a huge appreciation for keeping this content mandatory. I also appreciate having a waiver that is not quite as easy so that those kids aren't easily able to get out of this class. And I think about the conversation that we had with Araceli Dominguez, who is the head of the family specialists. And when the nutrition committee went to her to ask her what her biggest nutritional concerns are, her number one concern was access to health care, Medicaid, food stamps, SNAP, primary care visits, obtaining medical coverage benefits, transportation to clinics are obstacles even for illness, let alone for nutritional needs like obesity and nutrition deficiencies. And so I think I'm curious, and I don't know if somebody in this room knows this, but it makes me wonder, do we have an idea of what percentage of our kids are covered by some kind of health insurance? It sounds like there's definitely a gap. And if we have kids that are out there that are not insured, and we're not also offering mandatory health class for these kids, we're not doing them a service. Because if they don't have access to a primary care physician, if they don't have a parent that is as involved medically or, emotionally or concerned about their mental health, we're doing a disservice to not make this mandatory for them. And so I have an appreciation for keeping it mandatory at some capacity for those kids. And then I don't know if Emma Kelly has an idea of what percentage of our kids are insured or not. Do you know? We don't collect that information. Okay.
And just real quick before I give this back to Tony, because he's had his hand up for like ever and a day. I'm just going to double down right there. That was probably the biggest part of our discussion for 8 weeks. So when you talk about community values, you've got to talk about the entire community. And so to the people that will answer a survey versus the ones that won't, that's great. And we have taken that fully into account. We're also trying to take into account the people that did not answer the survey and the students whose voices were not heard. And so when you're trying to balance a decision, you got to think about everybody, not just one part of it. And every part is important. So that's why we chose, and I just want to go back to this before we go to Tony. We were given 3 options. I think it was said at the beginning there were only 2 options. There were 3. There's the option of mandatory, optional, and then mandatory with waivers. Those were the 3 options that we were given. We chose the second one. I just wanted to clear that up from the very first point because I think you shared that. And so it's not like we made up a third point to go with. We went with one of the points that the district gave to us. And when we looked at every issue and everybody and thought through every community value, this is the one that could speak to and could get to everybody. Whereas the others would miss part of the community values that we're called to uphold, like Ben said.
Tony.
Thank you very much. And that was a great explanation, and I did get part of that from Ron up here because he was also on the ad hoc committee. Because I was concerned from the standpoint of what you said earlier and the fact that you stated that it was rushed and that it was beyond your control. And I was not aware until just a few minutes ago that you had only 3 options. And because based off the information that you presented, and then even though that you said that the 80% said that it should be optional, but that there was discrepancy within that data as to did they really understand the question? Because they would answer it one way, but then give an explanation the other way in favor of the other side. It made it seem like you rushed the data collection, or that there, because of the discrepancy, you were doing the best you could with the information that you had. But to me, it sounded like the ad hoc committee needed to go back to the board and say, we need more time, we need better data to make a decision. But obviously, you didn't have that decision. You had three choices. You had to come up with one of them. And so I appreciate the time that y'all spent. I still think it's somewhat, it's kind of a flawed, because the data was somewhat flawed, or the not clarity on some of the questions. Y'all are being hamstrung on the decision that you made, but I'm glad to know that those are the three decisions that you had, and I appreciate the decisions that y'all made. So, I was going to. Okay, so we do have, unfortunately, 5 minutes to try to either wrap this up, because I apologize to Rose Garcia. It does not look like we're going to be able to get her presentation in at this time, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll make it super quick. If this is voted on and the board does adopt this, my question is, will it be advertised, and how will it be advertised that there is a waiver process and that your waiver will be accepted? Because when you hear the word mandatory, I would assume, so run with me on an assumption, that parents will go, oh, it's mandatory, you have to take this. Where unless you are well informed per the district or somehow, and what does that look like? Was that a conversation you had? How will a parent know that my child can opt out for scheduling purposes or personal choice or whatever, and that my waiver will be approved without question?
This is, that's going to be totally up to the board and the district to do that. Now, along those same lines, one of the conversations that's come back up is there's been, probably could be a better job at some schools, not at all of them, but at making the parents aware of this before it's too late, because a lot of them get even beyond 9th grade and they go, oh, crud, I've got to do that. Oh, man, I wish I'd have done it in 8th grade. I didn't know I could. And so there's some better, awareness that could be made already, and definitely needs to be done with any change. So it's coming. Real quick, you want to pass it down? Y'all want to? Do you think can we do like comment, and then answer them all at once? Is that okay?
Okay with me? I have just a quick comment that I haven't really heard anyone say along these lines. There's a couple of concerns I have about the waiver process. I appreciate the need for the waiver, or the desire and some of the impacts for the waiver process. I have some concerns because one thing I feel like we're not hearing is that NEISD has required this high school health class for more than 30 years, and there's good reasons for that. I don't feel like we're hearing anything about what those reasons are. And so I feel like that's kind of a gap on making a decision that it's not required anymore. Second, I feel like we've heard a lot about how this content is important and valuable for kids in their future life. Third, I think there's also some GPA implications if there's people who don't take the class. And so I haven't heard anyone say about a test out option. And I feel like that should be something that maybe it's not I sign a piece of paper, I'm out of it, and now I get an advantage on my GPA. Maybe it's I take a test to prove that I know this content. And maybe you're right, it's because I learned it, I remember my health class in 6th grade or 8th grade or whatever, but I know this content, I get a grade on my test, we kind of solve everything, all those birds with one stone.
Test out options are there now. They're hardly ever used because if they do that, whatever grade they get on the test sticks with them.
So Jude, if we have a test out option, why are we even talking about another way to get out of this class?
Yeah, there's a whole, yeah.
And a side note, as you're handing this off, this is the weeds that we kept going into and out of.
Right. So we did have that conversation. There's something about, is it performance, is it not performance? TEA gave one set of guidance, and there's other sets of guidance. So we decided to back off of that because if the board and the district want to look into a test out option, whether it's through the credit by exam or some other format, that's something that they can come up with. That's something us as community members can offer a suggestion. You know what I mean? Like, it just got real. We did, I promise, talk about it.
It goes on their transcript.
Well, if you do the credit by exam, the grade stands. It is. Yeah, right. But we decided we're not going to get into that. That's above what we wanted to get into.
There's two down here.
Give her the one that works.
I'll get two.
You've been silent.
I did want to make a motion that we table this because there was some other important information that we needed that's later on the agenda, like a meeting that needs to be scheduled.
We can do that later. We need to try to wrap this up. So is there a motion?
She made a motion,
She
so
made a
we have to
motion.
answer her motion.
Second the motion to table this since we're not.
Okay. We have.
It comes to a vote. Hey, discussion and vote. Let's go.
All right.
Is there need to be a discussion, and that's it. And
Is it, okay, we have a motion to table this, and we have a second. The motion was made by Christie. Let's see here. Let's get some notes. And the second was by Ruth. Okay, do we have any discussion?
Yes. I want to say on this, we can move through this very quickly, and depending on whether we table it or not, if it does not get tabled and we finish this, we can just move on immediately to a vote on our recommendation. Our recommendation, we specifically from the ad hoc set this up as we're recommending mandatory with waiver. We didn't give a second option. So very quickly, we can move through this discussion, this vote, deal with the results of this vote, and if it does not get tabled, we can move very quickly into actually voting on a recommendation. And whichever way it goes, everybody's voice actually gets heard on the work that we did. And if the main body does not want this and wants to kick it back to the board, you have two choices now. You can table it, and then we have no idea what everybody's decision was, or we can vote through this, and then everybody can reject our vote, or approve it, or whatever the vote falls, that gives the board a message from the SHAC as a whole, and not tabling it, which that doesn't really complete what we were tasked with doing.
I just was going to say that I feel like this option, mandatory with waiver option, it gets you more data collected. So if you have an influx of people,
Time out. We've got to get
waiver.
Right.
I know. Thank you.
Just that the mandatory with the waiver option does give you more time to collect data. And if you have an influx of people that are choosing that waiver option, you're going to see that, and then a new vote can be made. So this is a step in the right direction. If you are voting for optional, it's kind of a medium ground. So you can use the next couple of years to collect data and see, wow, 90% of the kids are opting out with these waivers. Maybe we shouldn't do this anymore. But at least this gives you the chance to see what the community really wants and what they really need. That's just.
I was just going to make the point that I was under the understanding that the Board of Trustees directed this to be the deadline, and tabling this is not going to achieve that. So I don't understand how we can table it.
okay,
So now we vote on motion.
We still have to vote on it.
back to you.
We've all become really good at Robert's rules.
All right. So at this point, we have a motion to table it, a second. Can we go ahead and get a vote, please? For all those in favor of tabling the ad hoc committee vote, please raise your hand, say aye.
Tabling there's point of clarification, there's tabling the discussion, correct?
No, tabling the vote.
Okay.
Tabling the vote.
All those in favor say aye, raise your hand. We have 2. All those opposed say aye and raise your hand. Aye. The nays have it. And so
I move to vote on the ad hoc recommendation.
I was about to do that.
Let's get it on the mic. So
Well, since
I'm ready to go. He's like,
well, since Diana's officially has the mic, I will take Diana's motion to
I move.
to vote on the ad hoc committee recommendation. Do we have a second? Ben, I'll give you the second. All right. I think we've had the discussion. Can we go ahead and pass out the votes or pass out the ballots?
Okay.
For the votes. Let's see, at this time, we're going to have Mitch Knopf and Brandon Turner be the tellers.
Thank you, though.
On the ballot, please mark yes to approve the motion. I still need your help. Hey, please. Please mark yes to approve the motion. Mark no to not approve, disapprove the motion. And you can choose to abstain. Please, once you have voted, please fold. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Please, when you vote, please fold the sample ballot in half like so, and then raise your hand so the tellers can come back. Yes.
When we're voting on
Your original.
the original.
Okay, that's what I thought.
who, so if the, not to be mean or whatever, just point of clarification, can district employees that are directly involved in health, should they be recusing themselves from this vote? Abstain?
Abstain is an option,
Okay.
we don't decide whether they vote or not.
Okay.
For the record, if anybody asked, Jennifer Aguilar is not voting.
That we were made very real, clearly. And I apologize. I think it's not that it really matters. So, no, I do not agree with the motion means I don't agree with the recommendation. Or yes, I do approve means I do agree.
Rose Garcia, I apologize again about the discussion going so long and not being able to get to you.
I'd be happy to do it at your first meeting next year.
Great. Thank you very much for coming, and I really appreciate everything that you do. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Sorry.
You're all good, man. You need one. Good. Yes. Yeah, thank you. That's right, I saw that.
Officially, June 30th.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
30 days left in there.
I'm not getting paid for them, so.
So while they're tallying the votes, if I can get everybody's attention, please. While they're tallying the votes, the next item is the possible action for a June SHAC meeting. As you can see, we definitely need one because we have a presentation from the Chase Committee that was on the agenda that is being moved to a potential June meeting. so that we can get a recommendation or presentation and possible recommendation before the end of June 30th of this school year, which was a request by the Board of Trustees. So with that, do I have a motion to have a June 5th full SHAC meeting? Okay, we have a motion. Okay, and the second, Lauren? And the second was Jessica. All right. Do we need to ballot this, or are we okay with a show of hands? All right. Okay. For all of those in favor of a June 5th full SHAC meeting, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. All right. The ayes have it. Thank you very much.
Tony, are you okay if when I send that out, like maybe I send an email out right now to see if that is an afternoon or an evening since it's summer? I know we had talked about that. Or
I can't be there that day, so I can't present it. I can't do the thing. That's why I abstained.
Diana has presented before.
Diana, as the
the
vice
SHAC?
chair, she could present it if. Yeah. So yes, you would, if you don't mind, sending out an email to the full SHAC, giving that option. Yeah. Yeah, technically, we did vote on a June 5th meeting date, so.
But I give 2 time options, like what we always do, plus an evening option.
Yes, please. Yes, would you do that, please?
Absolutely, and I'll get that poll first before I send out the actual
Great, thank you, Jen.
item.
Okay, while we're still tallying the votes, I would like to take this time to recognize someone, Jennifer Aguilar, the Director of Physical Education, Health, and Athletics. She's been an educational leader for over 30 years, where she's served our community as a teacher, a coach, instructional specialist, assistant director, assistant principal, director within, and a director within the NEISD. Jen, if you'll please step down, step down here in the front. Hey. Jen, we want to requisite. All right. Standing oak. All right. Jen, we want to recognize you for your invaluable service to our community and to the children of the NEISD. You have been a great resource as a SHAC facilitator, but you've been an even better friend. Thank you so much. By the way, Tony got the flowers on me. We have a couple cards for you. Yep. Okay, thank you so much, Jen. By the way, if you don't know, you're awesome. And it's on the record, too. And it's seconded, all right. All right.
Thank you. That's all I can say right now.
Yep. Yes, in fact, as the record shows, by the unanimous applause and the standing ovation, it was unanimous that you're awesome. Thank you again, Jen.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, for the ad hoc On the motion of the ad hoc recommendation as proposed, there were 32 votes cast. The number for election is 17. There were 25 votes for aye, 7 votes for no, 0 illegal votes. So the motion does pass. Great. And at this, so it is now 1:44. Thank you for staying extra minutes to get this done. We do adjourn standing committees. Obviously, there's no time. SHAC would like to remind everybody of the board meeting, the full SHAC meeting on June 5th. And please be looking for an email from Jen to look at the proposed times. Thank you very much.